This is Kyle Sneerly again here. I'm back to do the greatest hits of reporting. Thanks again for taking the time to join another session. If this is your first, welcome. I'll be leading today's presentation. I've got Angie and Taylor to help me with moderating the questions, so feel free to use the feature there to send them as they come up, and we'll try to answer them the best we can. All right, so quick agenda. We're going to cover three basic areas today, focusing mostly on the first two within NexGen. We're going to look at some of the management reports. We're going to look at more of the functional reports, and then we're going to do a quick view of Power BI. So some of the reports we're going to look at from a management perspective, we're going to focus on P&L reports and revenue reports, job focused and unit focused. We're going to look at some of our forecasting, job forecasting capabilities, equipment utilization, downrunning, and some of our labor reports, productive versus non-productive. From the functional side, we're going to look at jobs unbilled, e-ticket status, quotes by. We'll look at some of our batch audit reports on the invoicing and vouchering side. Go into a few of the payroll reports for dispatch as well as the payroll team. Spend some time looking at certification reports. There's a couple that I think could be beneficial. And then work orders from PMs and deficiencies. All right. With that said, I'm going to hop over into NexGen and get started. Hopefully everybody can see my screen. The first report I'm going to start with is under reports, expense, revenue, profit, job profit and loss by work date. I'm going to clear out this data here. Sorry, I had it open. So this report, a disclaimer here, or just a reminder, always make sure you've got your dates where they need to be. That's an important gotcha when it comes to reporting. Oftentimes that will give you some confusing results, so just make sure you're always checking your dates. The job profit and loss by work date basically gives you a high-level P&L of each individual job. So you can see each line here represents a separate job within this period here. And just to kind of break down each column, you've got your total revenue, pulls directly from your invoice, so pretty straightforward there. We do note the total labor hours just as a reference point. So this comes directly from your payroll. This is a direct expense correlating with your payroll dollar amount here. We also pull in union expenses, the fringe benefits, and we got a couple different overhead buckets. We've got the workers' comp expense, which can be set up at the employee level or assigned at the employee level. And you can have some different overhead buckets for worker comp related expenses, burden expenses. That includes both labor burden, and if you use it for purchasing, that will show up in the burden column as well. I did want to spend a little bit of time on the equipment expenses and make sure everyone's very clear on what that represents and how that's calculated and where you may run into some issues with that. The equipment expense is actually set up on the individual units. So under maintain units, I'll pick my AT09 here. And on the buy sell info tab, you've got a field allocated and rental invoicing hourly cost. So for this unit, it's $34.86. That's a very important value to be set. This is your estimated hourly cost that it takes to run a piece of equipment. And this is what pulls in directly to your equipment expense. So if I invoice the AT09 for 8 hours, and I've got my billing code set to auto allocate, which you should for all your crane codes, it'll pull in on the expense side an estimated $34.86 per hour. So that's what you're going to see here under equipment expenses. One problem we see a lot of our customers run into when they don't have these values set, the way that NexGen is designed, it's more on the conservative side. So if you've got 0 in here, it uses your full revenue amount for that crane. So if you build 8 hours at $400 an hour, you're going to see that full $3,200 as expense, as equipment expense, as opposed to the lower cost estimate. So it's important that you get those set. One other note on this field If you do have kind of generic re-rent pieces of equipment or units, you can set this to a penny, and that will keep it off all of your reporting, because when you've got a re-rent piece of equipment, normally you're going to be handling that expense through a PO, which will be captured under the material expenses. So just keep that in mind. You may see it on certain reports, or you may have had issues where you've double recognized expense if you set up a rate there and then issued a PO. And like I said, the material expense, this is going to pull in anything from a PO. So whether it's actual materials or whether it's re-renting personnel or equipment, that will show in this column here. And it does show at the time of receiving. So similar to the parts, when the receiver is created for the PO, that's when you'd see it on your job P&L. If you go straight to a voucher, that will post here right away and bypass all of the receiving steps. But just be aware of the timing. So material is when it's received, equipment expense is when it's invoiced, along with your revenue here. And then on the labor side, you may run these prior to the payroll being processed. So you may have sent in some labor records from Adam, your guys in the field. They've been approved by dispatch, but they haven't gone through the official payroll processing within NexGen where the overtime's applied and it's eligible to be exported to payroll. If it has not been processed, you will see nothing for labor hours or expenses. So that's a pretty common theme through all of our labor reports, with the exception of a few that are pre-processor specific. But just keep that in mind for anytime you're looking for labor and you don't see it, whether it's on this report or whether it's in a work order or against a work order or a job, just be mindful of the processing criteria that's there. All right, so this shows you, I've got it in the summary view right now, so you can kind of just get an overview of all your jobs. You can go to the last page here to see your total for that period for all jobs for your company. You can run it by yard if you got multiple yards. Obviously, different companies can come into play as well. Or if you just want to look more closely at a specific job, I've got one here. You can enter the job number there, and you can switch it over from summary to detail. And this will show just that one job. So that same summary line up top, this one's got a little bit of everything. So you've got revenue and costs and all these different buckets. And then below, you're going to see what makes up those different buckets. So from a revenue perspective, at $13K, I can see exactly which invoice that came from and what billing codes were used at what rates. You can see that reconciles there. I've got some materials on this job. Looks like an outside hire. You can see that posted under my material expense. And then down below, you're going to have the equipment expense. So like I said, that's the corresponding expense side of our invoice for the equipment. So the AT06 had a rate of $100 an hour. It was invoiced for 16 hours. And here is the 1731 is our equipment expense here. And then the labor detail will show below. So you can get a more granular look. You can use a summary to spot jobs that may stand out and you may want to further investigate. And then the summary is a good way to kind of drill down into that. All right, moving on here. Let me go back to move this over. The next report or group of reports I want to look at are under reports, expense, revenue, profit. We've got summary reports and detail reports, revenue detail reports by invoice date and by work date. I apologize if you've heard me explain this before, but I'm going to do it again just so everyone's clear on the difference there and the revenue recognition or the way the revenue appears in NexGen. So summary reports by invoice date, pretty straightforward there. It is based on the actual date of the invoice, the date it was issued. So on the main tab of your invoice screen, whatever dates you have there, it'll post fully in that accounting period. The summary reports by work date, that's actually looking at the start date of each line item on an invoice. So if you're running, the invoice date and the work date reports, if all the work's completed in October and it's invoiced in October, those two will tie out, or at least that job will be all accounted for in October. But let's say that the job started on September 15th, but wasn't billed until October 7th. You'd see the revenue in October for the invoice date reports, and you'd see all of the revenue in September based on the 9/15 start date of the billing code on the detail tab. So just keep that in mind when you're running these reports. We've done a better job of labeling those, so it's a little more clear. I'm going to use the work date report. It's a little more reflective of when the work actually took place. So this is the summary. Got one job in here, but I'm going to blank that out. You've got a lot of different view by options. You can do a very high level at the yard, just get a total revenue. I can also hit the profit button, and I can switch from looking at my revenue to my profit and loss. So it's that same criteria of company and yard, just from a profit perspective. So very similar to what we looked at before. There's several different view bys. If you want to look more from a salesperson perspective, you can select all salespeople, and it'll give you that same P&L by salesperson as opposed to being job centric. Or if you just want to look strictly at revenue, you can kind of bounce back and forth.
Hey, Kyle, I wanted to jump in really quick. We had a good question come through for some clarification.
Yes.
On the expense revenue profit reports, is there a way for equipment expenses to show without having to create the invoice first?
Yes, there is. You can manually allocate your equipment expense to a job. So under Enter Equipment Allocation, I'm going to take one step back just to make sure everyone's clear on the mechanics there, because I think it's important. So under Maintain Codes, Billing Codes, you haven't, you can see you got the 8-ton carry deck here. The Auto Allocate box is checked. What that means is when you invoice that expense is automatically allocated from the unit, the amount that you set up under the Maintain Unit screen, and put against that job as expense at the hourly rate. If it's unchecked, that won't occur. You'll just get the revenue and nothing will come through. So if you don't want to handle it automatically, we encourage you do. It just saves your team time. Less keystrokes. If you want to do it manually, or if it was missed for some reason, you can always come to this screen here, the Enter or the Equipment Allocation. Pull a job real quick. And so what this screen does, it'll show you anything that's already posted. So this job here, I've already got activity that came through the auto allocation or through the invoice. So this can't be altered. But if I needed to add an additional allocation, I can hit the add. I've got 3 different units on that particular job. So I can pick the third one here. And then I can put in the number of hours. I'll just put 2 hours for that at a rate of 35. And I can save it. So now when I go to this job, I'll get the crane and the additional cost here. The additional $70 here will show as an expense on that same date. So you do have the option to manually enter those. There also is you can use Excel to kind of speed that process up. But we recommend that you try to do the auto allocate as often as you can. But good question. All right, so back to the summary reports. I think you get the idea here. There's a ton of different view bys if you want to view by schedule type and just see how you're doing based on the different type of equipment. So this is all schedule types, and I believe it. Yeah, so it'll do a subtotal by crane, by forklift, by all your different schedule types that you have in your system. Let's see if there's any other ones. Customer is a good one too. If you want to look at a specific customer or all customers, you can do so. Then basically it's the same criteria repeated, but it's more geared towards a specific salesperson or a specific schedule type, where the other ones are more all, all encompassing. So that is the summary report by work date. The summary report by invoice date looks very similar, just has different revenue recognition criteria that I mentioned before. out of that one. All right, so I'm going to go back to my expense, revenue, profit. So just a quick look at the revenue detail. Same numbers. Oops, I selected view by here. As our summary, it's just the next level down. So if I go by, let's just do all customers here. All right, so you're going to get a breakdown by invoice for each customer as opposed to just seeing that high level summary. So you can track it back to an invoice, to a job. If you've got a specific question about that invoice, it's just like most reports, it's interactive. So I just double clicked on the 42157 invoice. It opened up that invoice. If I wanted to hop back to the job, I can just go from the invoice screen, double click on the job number and go and see what's going on if I got any questions. So just a lot of the same view bys, just a more granular level than the summary reports. Now these ones, there's not a revenue or profit button on the detail, but you will see in the view bys, it'll state whether it's profit or not. So like if I look at job profit and loss by unit, I can put a specific unit in there. And then for the AT09, I can see all the jobs that it was on and all the revenue and costs that it generated. So that leads me into my next report, which is a similar view, just a little bit of a different layout. And that's the unit P&L. It's actually under reports, units. It's called equipment revenue report, but it does show both revenue and expense. I'm going to change my dates on this one a little bit. Type for help. All right. So this report is unit centric as opposed to job centric. So we've got our unit codes up here. You can see the AT09. You can see the revenue for the equipment. And all the different revenue types up front there. And then you've got the costs. So you've got your labor cost, you've got your material cost, and then also the burden is factored in to this as well. One thing I wanted to point out here, and you'll see it missing, is there's no equipment expense when you run the unit revenue report or the equipment revenue report. That's because you're incurring the actual expense, whether it's repairs, whether it's fuel, whether it's the labor, all of your expenses are direct. So the equipment expense that we saw at the unit level is meant to kind of spread your total cost burden across all your jobs, just to be a little more conservative on your profitability assessment. But these are capturing all the direct costs with a few burdens in there. But that's why you wouldn't see this or see that on this particular report. That's a question we get quite often. All right, I see. Taylor, is there a couple more questions that came in or anything that you want to?
Yeah, there's just one more that came in asking about, can you run a report by salesperson, job number, and contribution margin percentage? I believe you did cover that a little bit earlier, but maybe that was back on the job profit and loss, I believe.
Yeah, salesperson, job, and contribution margin. Yeah, let me jump back real quick.
I would imagine the closest one there would be salesperson profit.
Yeah, I think we got that. So you can pick a specific salesperson. Not sure what the data looks like in here. This is our test system, so sometimes you get some goofy stuff. Yeah, so this would be salesperson by job, and then this is the detail. You could also run this in the summary view. Then you've got your profit margin as well. Okay. All right, so moving on down the list, we talked about the two different revenue recognition approaches with the job or the work date and the invoice date. We've got a report. It's actually a forecast report. We've got multiple uses for it. So it's under reports, forecast reports, job revenue forecast. And I'm going to I'm going to use this as an example just to kind of show how the revenue is dispersed. So I got a job that I created. It runs from 8/14 to 9/14, and that crosses over months. So if it was, let's say I invoiced that in October, which I did, if it was invoice date based, you'd see it in October. If it was job or work date based, it would be in August because it's a start date. But what the job revenue forecast does from a estimates, which you see here, this comes directly from our job estimate tab, and from an actuals, which comes from our invoice, is it looks at the total number of work days in each period if it does cross multiple months, and it allocates that accordingly. So you can see you run this report by 1 month because it was initially intended for forecasting. We use it also for looking for unbilled revenue, which I'll show you here in just a second. But I just wanted to give you a quick illustration of how the allocation works with a simple one job example here. So if I go back to August, I see this is a $1,000 invoice total. So I got my 545 in August. I've got the remaining 454, 55 in September. So this is the only report or type of reports that will actually use what we call accrual-based logic and segregate the estimates and actuals into the appropriate accounting period. And like I said, it does that by looking at the total number of work dates in the range between 8/14 and 9/14, and then giving a percentage based on how many of those fall in August versus September. So hopefully that helps from just a revenue recognition, because sometimes you'll see some goofy numbers, like the invoice is $1,000, you see 454, 55, and you're wondering what happened there. So chances are across multiple periods, and the rest of the revenue is sitting in a prior or a future period. So the way this report works, I'm going to back up a few months here. I'm going to start with a high-level view. So all selected yards, it's going to start with kind of your management view of how things are going. So the first column here, and this shows by the Detroit yard, the first column is actuals. This comes from your invoices for the period of March 2020. Then you've got your current estimated. That comes from, and current estimated is meaning current to the period of March. So it doesn't mean the current accounting period, but current for this particular month. So again, this was created as a forecast report. So anyway, so this comes from all the different estimate tabs of your jobs, and then the variance between the two. So if I'm looking at this as a manager, and obviously March is in the past, and I estimated I was going to bill just under 500K, but I only billed 159,000, I'd have a few questions, right? So what you can do from there is you can change the view by to job summary. This is going to give you those same numbers just at a job level. So I got my 159 and my 480, same numbers as we saw before, but I can see it broken down by job. So I can go kind of down the list here. So this one, I estimated 5,000, billed 5,000. That one looks good. So then I'm going to look at like this one right here. I estimated I was going to bill 68,000, and I only billed 35 in March. So you can dig down and figure out what's going on there. So I can put in the job number, 29450. I can change it from job summary to job detail. And then I'm going to get just that job. I'm going to get all the billing codes that were on that job, both actually billed and both estimated, and I can see where I'm off. So you can kind of line up where your estimates were higher than your actuals and figure out if that's either unbilled activity or somewhat overestimated. But it is a good tool to use for month-end kind of investigating of unbilled revenue. Initially, we designed it to look at some of your jobs that were on the books for the future. So if you ran it for December of this year, I don't know if we've got much activity going on there, but for some of our companies, or some of our customers, I should say, they've got a lot of turnaround jobs that go out in the future. And so this just gives them, I got nothing for November. So our test system isn't very busy. But it gives them a view of what they've got on the books and what they can expect just from those book jobs. And then when November's over and when they're closing down the month in December, they can look back and see how they did against those estimates. Now, obviously, those would rise throughout the month, but it's a good way to kind of keep your estimates and your actuals aligned. And hopefully if you're quoting properly and you're maintaining your estimate tab in your jobs, those numbers can be pretty valuable. All right, I think we got a question here. Is there a
it seemed to be kind of what you were referring to, so that's why I threw it up as the current question. So
yeah, we do have a report under reports jobs all the way down at the bottom here, job estimate variance report. Let's see what kind of data we got in here. So it's a little bit different of a view. It's got different sections to it. But this is the one report where you can see what you quoted, what you estimated, meaning what was the end result in the job estimate, and what you invoiced. So in this case here, we quoted 23K, that carried over with no adjustments on the job, and then we only invoiced the 5,400. And then from there, you can go down, like if I wanted to see the detail of that, similar to my other reports, I could put in that job number. And it's going to give me a breakdown by billing code of what was estimated and what was actually billed. So again, it's a little bit hard to find, so don't be afraid to use the favorite menu to manage some of these reports. I know there's especially in the job area, there's a ton of them. So it's all the way down at the bottom here on the jobs report, jobs estimate variance report. Any other questions, Taylor? We're good?
There was, sorry, my mute button there. There was one more that came through related to the job profit and loss. How do you get an expense under materials outside repair? I'm not quite sure if that was referring to the unit revenue or unit profitability report or revenue report or the job profit and loss, but maybe a good quick question to answer.
Yeah, so I mean, regardless of whether it's a repair, the triggering factor is when it's received. So if you've got a PO, whether it's tied to a work order or not, the PO will, let's say it's independent of all work orders, it'll still, and it ties to that job, it'll still fall under that materials expense when it's received. If you voucher it, it'll hit at that point. So I hope that answers the question. And in terms of a unit, if it's tied to a unit, it's the same criteria, whether it's on a work order, which is obviously a one-to-one with the unit, or if you just reference the unit in the voucher or the PO, it's the same timing as the job. Okay, how are we doing on time here? All right, moving on here. Just gonna quickly show, hopefully everyone's familiar with the utilization reports. I'm going to focus on the equipment utilization by date range, by yard. Just a few things to point out here. I ran this for January to March of 2015. So we've got 3 months in that range. If it was previously sold, it's going to be 0 months because it wasn't in operation during that period. This particular piece of equipment was sold mid-month, so it's only representing 1 month of activity out of those 3. You've got your usage hours, and you've got your income coming from your invoice. So the usage percentage, just as a reminder, this is a target that is set up at the unit type level. So you're going to put in a target for each unit type that you have, and that's what that's based off of, comparing to the actual usage. The income target is going to be under maintain units. It's actually right below where we set up that hourly expense. It's going to be the monthly target there. It's just for reporting purposes, so you can see how you're doing against what you'd like to bring in on an average monthly basis. Pretty common report, just a lot of good information there too. Hopefully everyone's familiar with it. Down rent, this is a good one. This is under reports, units, and we're going to start with the down rent summary. So I pulled up the AT11. You can see the unit code. Each page represents its own unit. So what this does, it shows you how often a piece of equipment goes out at each different unit type. So this is a 275. You can see it went out only 52% of the time as a 275. So what this does is it shows you how often you're down running and at what rates you're down running. So if, in this case, I know that if I was down running a 275 that often, I may think about changing up my fleet a little bit or assessing whether or not I could get by with a lower tonnage capacity. So this is very valuable. Obviously, you have to have the secondary unit type set up on your units to allow for the down running, but this just kind of gives you the final score of what activity took place and how often that's occurring. You can also go to the detail for this. So if I wanted to see a breakdown of the specifics under reports, units, down rental detail, and I'll go to my AT11. And then you can see all the specific invoices for the different tonnage types here. So if you just wanted to break those numbers down further. All right, the next report we're going to look at is the productive versus non-productive labor reports. So under reports, labor, productive versus non-productive summary. Let's change our dates here. We're going to go back to 2015. All right, so just for definition purposes, productive versus non-productive. Productive is classified as any labor that is posted against a job, a work order, or directly to a unit. So you can see those three categories broken out here. Non-productive doesn't necessarily mean it's non-productive. It just means it's not going against one of those three criteria. And you can see those hours broken down here. This is where we recommend that when your folks are working on an activity that doesn't tie to one of those three criteria, they use the labor classification codes. In this case, you can see of those, how many hours we got here, 132 non-productive hours. You can see how much was allocated to the different buckets there. And then down below, we got a nice summary. 97% of the labor was deemed productive in this period from an hours perspective, and the same for a actual direct expense perspective. And then the other 2.8% of the non-productive labor is represented here. So this gives you a good idea if you're, letting the guys do some activity in the yard that's not against work order, or you're doing a lot of training and you want to kind of get an understanding of how much of that is being allocated towards those efforts. You can use this report. There's a detail equivalent of this, which just breaks it down into low-level detail. All right. So I'm going to start looking at a few of the more functional reports that are used by the different teams. So I'm going to start with the jobs and build. And I did want to make a clarification. We do have two types now. So I'm going to start with our original jobs and build report. Very simple criteria here. If there's any job that ended between the beginning of 2019 and the end of 2019, and has zero invoicing activity against it, it'll show here. So this is a good first step or first indicator that you may have unbilled or probably have unbilled activity. Like in this case, you've got a job from January 15th to May 31st. There's no invoicing against it. What's going on there? So you can do some investigation. Now, the one shortfall with this report is if you've got a recurring job or a job that's billed more than once, the first time this job is invoiced. So if it's a bare rental and you're invoicing monthly, after that first invoice, it falls off this report. So this is really good for taxi work where you're only going to bill it one time, or short-term work. And like I said, a good first line of defense against unbilled activity. The new unbilled report is jobs unbilled unit people. This is one that we developed, I believe, in the last year. I've had some questions on this one. That's why I want to point it out, what it is, what it represents. So unlike the jobs unbilled, the logic here is it's saying between the the same period, if I've got any activity on my unit people tab, whether it's a piece of equipment or an employee scheduled beyond my last invoice date, it's going to flag it here. So if I last invoiced this job on April 30th, but the date range goes to May 31st, it's going to flag it in this report and say, hey, you may have not billed in its entirety for this job based on the dates we see in unit people and your last invoice date. So you may get some false positives here, but I think it's a good tool to use just to investigate or at least take a look at some of these jobs. It may be data entry, it may be whatever the scenario may be, or you may find some unbilled revenue. So you can't have enough tools in your kit for that one. And then we're going to look at the relatively new e-ticket status report. This is a nice report. Basically gives you a summary of the e-tickets completed in the field. It gives you the timestamps that the operators hit and the drivers hit. Shows you their name, their credentials there. And the really cool thing about this is you get the geo coordinates of where they are when they hit the button. So when Jack hit the button on the 14th of September, I don't know where this is just by looking at it. So I can click the link. It's going to open up the Google Maps, and you can see exactly where Jack was, probably in his apartment. So yeah, you got kind of a nice audit function to see and make sure the guys are where they say they are. And if there's ever an issue or a dispute, this can also be a tool used for that as well. Moving on the list here, quotes. Don't want to leave the sales guys out here. So we've got our, I'll look at the quote status report. Start with that one. We're going to look by status. I'm going to look at pending. So I want to see all the quotes that are pending. Oh, I should have looked at my dates there. It'll take a minute. So it just gives you a real quick list of all pending quotes. You can also use this for lost quotes. If you're putting all your quotes in the system, you're actually tracking the ones that you lose. This is a nice report because you can see it shows both the lost code and comments. So you can do some analysis as to why certain job opportunities aren't coming to fruition. So there's a lot of different ways you can view your quotes there. Not a ton of reporting on quotes. There's also one on quotes not converted. Same type of principle there. So anything that has not been converted to a job would show on this list. Okay. Trying to be mindful of time here. A couple more to show. Under invoices and vouchers, we have what we call the batch audit report. I'm going to look at the invoice or the revenue side first. This is one of the few places in NexGen you're actually going to see GL codes reported on. So I've got my detailed view here, which will show you each individual invoice. I've got my summary that breaks it down by your debits and your credits. So I got my AR account and my corresponding revenue accounts broken down at a summary level. And the nice thing, and this is, I got the export status set to all. What you can use this for is you can look at your not exported invoices. Probably would be similar because I don't know if it's hooked up to accounting. Yeah, so you can see everything kind of in the queue that's going to be exported as kind of a way to ensure or to reconcile with your accounting package that what you're sending over is correct. If you got anything that looks kind of off, you can investigate that in the detail tab. And this same report exists on the payable side under vouchers batch audit report, where you can see what you're passing over to your payable system. You've got your accounts payable versus your on the credit side versus your expense accounts or your inventory accounts. So if you're on the finance team, this is something that if you're wondering where the GL codes are in NexGen, they don't exist many places. They're primarily meant to push over to accounting, but we do have this for reconciliation purposes. All right. I'll look at a few payroll reports just to make sure everyone's aware of this. From a dispatching perspective, Taylor mentioned it yesterday on his best practices presentation. Please make sure you're using the tickets not completed under reports and jobs to ensure that all tickets that have been issued are in fact completed. This is a pretty scary list if this was real. You want to work this down to nothing every day to make sure your payroll's coming in correctly, as well as your tickets for invoicing. So make sure you're using that. If you're in a dispatching position, hopefully you're aware of the payroll preprocessor status. I mentioned earlier that the vast majority of labor reports show post-processing. The only exceptions are these three in the second section here under labor reports: employee payroll preprocessor, the summary of that, and the status. You'll see payroll preprocessor in the title, but it's only these three that are going to show hours that have not gone through the formal approval process. But the payroll preprocessor status, this is a report that you should be running every day if your labor is coming in through Adam as a dispatcher. You can run it by not approved. You see all the labor that's been entered that has not been approved. You can double click on this individual's record. It's going to open up all the records between whatever the date range was. So in this case, the entire year for 2015, but it goes specifically to the one that you double clicked, and you can come here, approve, move on. So this really should be your starting point for all your labor approvals. And then running this daily, making sure you whittle this down to 0. So start with your tickets completed, make sure you whittle this down to 0. It's a good safe checking point to make sure that you're good there.
Another note I'd like to add on this report, Kyle, for the payroll processor report, is it's really, really helpful. And I get a lot of feedback from some of my customers that when they're working through, if they try to filter through the enter labor for payroll preprocessor screen, it can be a little tricky just from an employee perspective and looking through. So a lot of times what I wind up recommending is just use this report, and you can click into each one of those entries and it'll take you right to the entry right away. So it can be a much easier way to kind of navigate from employee to employee as you kind of move along. So just an important note there that you can click into each one of those line items as well.
Yeah, but you can also filter by the employee name. So I use this to approve our time at FCC, and this is filtering by, or sorting by, I should say, the employee, and then double clicking like Taylor said, takes you right there. Oh, that person's not there anymore. All right, moving on, got a couple more different reports in NexGen. So we've got certifications. There's the employee certificates report. This is a grid view. You can see all the certifications that are out there, and then the expiration date for all your different employees. So this is a nice visual representation of who's got their cert, who doesn't, and then who has an expired cert. And you can kind of play around with this. You can also look at unit certificates as well, but primarily this is used for employee certs. We also have a coming due certifications. So I ran this for the next 30 days. And we've got some pretty overdue certifications in our test system here. But essentially it's going to show coming due in how many days, or if it's past due. So if it's in this column, that's probably not a good thing. You want to make sure they get recertified, or you update your data in the system. Pretty straightforward there. And then last but not least, we want to just look at a couple of the work order. These are more interactive job tools than reports, but just want to point these out to make sure everyone's aware of them and utilizing them if it applies. It's the work orders from PMs and the work orders from deficiencies. Work orders from due PMs. I'll change this to all in the next 30 days. So it's got kind of a similar logic to the certification report we just looked at, where I can put in a criteria of how many days I'm looking out. These are all well past due as well. And you can create your work order. So the AT09 is over 2 years beyond its annual crane inspection. So if I wanted to, I could hit OK here. It's going to ask me, it already has a work order. Do I want to add it to it? Or it's already got a crane inspection. So this is, it's an open work order that hasn't been closed. So I just say cancel, I'm good there. I could go into 4987 and make sure that that's moving along. This is obviously older data, so it's not as relevant, but yeah, make sure you're looking at your work orders from due PMs to ensure those are getting done in a timely fashion. And it saves you some steps from having to go and create it manually. And this will update the system accordingly. And then there's the work orders from deficiencies. So these could be deficiencies that come from an e-ticket from an operator in the field, or it could be reported by a mechanic. But this is a nice tool for the maintenance manager or whoever's in charge of issuing the work orders to monitor, to make sure that all deficiencies from the field and from the shop are being acknowledged, whether they are put onto a work order or whether they're deemed no repair needed. If they are no repair needed, you have to add a comment, and just to for audit purposes to see why that was the case. But yeah, another useful tool for the shop to use. All right, so that's my list in NexGen. I'm going to pause. Taylor, do we have any other questions that came in?
No, somewhat. I did have one question come through where it looks like an attendee was having an issue with the auto allocate on the summary report by work date. Two quick kind of best practices I could say is maybe two things. One, check your dates. I can't tell you how often Kyle and myself, when we're pulling reports, forgetting to double check our date filter and what's showing there can cause issues with some stuff missing, as well as if your dates are in fact correct, go to the enter equipment allocation and look at that job that you were looking at, and see if anything is there for the dates as well. Otherwise, if you can't find a solution there, just please reach out to support or your CSM directly and see if they can help you with that, and we'd be happy to assist there. I just wanted to look at that. We've also got a request here. This one just came in. It'll go. That it would be beneficial to access PM reports in Atom, as it would help the technician, which I guess is more feedback than a question. But yeah, we appreciate that feedback, and we'll move forward accordingly with it.
Absolutely. Thanks, Taylor. All right, we got about 10 minutes left here, so I'm going to do a quick demo of Power BI and save a little more time for any last minute questions. So for those of you who are not familiar with Power BI, it is a Microsoft dashboard and reporting tool. It's something that we've used over the last several months, or maybe even a couple of years here now, to build into our reporting suite. It is not a standard part of NexGen. It's an add-on. But what it does is it can talk to multiple databases, but primarily NexGen, and present your data in dashboard format, give you a lot of interactive views. And we've got a current standard offering where we've got, I believe, 5 different dashboards that are created right now. In the sales area, we got a job P&L, utilization, forecasting, and labor. I know AG and David are going to be walking through the product roadmap. I think there's a few more in the pipeline that are going to be available in the not too distant future. So I guess my disclaimer, my comment there is, if you're interested in hearing more about Power BI, please reach out to our sales team or to your CSM, and we can give you more information. But for today's purposes, I just wanted to give you kind of a view of what the sales dashboard, or actually this is the job P&L. Sorry, I switched over. So I've got it. You can see the time frame here. These are interactive. So if I wanted to look at one salesperson, I can see how they're doing. You can look at jump from person to person here. And there's the corresponding detail. So if you want to get it over into Excel, if you're a finance person that likes to work there and manipulate data, you can do so as well. And just one general comment, all the reports we looked at in NexGen can be exported to a PDF or to Excel. Just to jump back real quick, I didn't mention that, but the Save As button here, and just change this to Excel. So if you ever need to get it into, we recommend you stay out of it, stay out of Excel as much as you can, but I know there's certain situations where that's required, so just to make sure everyone's aware of that. All right, so back over to Power BI. I'm actually going to jump into the sales dashboard here. Sales performance. So you can look at various periods here, see the total quotes, how many you've won, the value of your quotes, the value of the quotes won. So we just got it kind of grouped into some high-level buckets here, your conversion ratio, your average conversion days. You can look at individual salespeople, so it's dynamic. So it's really nice to get some quick answers. This is available, obviously, on the desktop, but it's also available on the application format, so on all your mobile devices, your phones, and your tablets. So it's a really nice thing to be able to look at on the run if you're managing a company or a yard. You can kind of click into, so I want to look at quotes one. Oops. Or if I want to look at a particular customer, I can look at just those. So yeah, didn't want to give an in-depth demo today. Just wanted to show you some other add-on options we have in the reporting world. Also, we've got some new reports coming in Telerik, which is going to be in application or in desktop NexGen reporting tool. AG and David are going to give you more info during the roadmap call, but basically it's a newer version. The reports are currently in Crystal. Telerik's got some more capabilities than Crystal does. So they're starting to build those out, and we're going to start seeing those introduced here in the not too distant future. So more to come on Power BI and the new Telerik reports, but I did want to mention that before we signed off today. So again, if you have any questions or any interest, please let us know. All right, Taylor, how am I doing on time?
We're looking good on time. We got about 7 minutes left here. I did have one more come through, and I would want to know more about this specific scenario, but I felt it was worth discussing anyway. The question was, is there a report that shows an invoice number that correlates with any tickets? So if a customer calls in and asks if a certain ticket has been invoiced, I guess my question there would be, I would ask that customer to let me know the invoice number or the job number and do a search there through your actual billing tabs and see what you can kind of find there. I would kind of want to know more about what the scenario would look like, specifically if a customer is referring to a singular ticket number, why they usually, from what I see, is they're usually associated with some kind of invoice or some kind of job. So I would recommend looking through those identifiers first, and then look through the invoices attached there and see what you can find. You can also, there is the change e-ticket invoice status screen under utilities that you could use as well, and that's it. You can look to see if any a specific ticket number has been invoiced. The only unfortunate thing about that is it does not list the specific invoice number that it's associated with, but it does associate the job number. But it does it doesn't give you the invoice number itself, but it does mark that it's invoiced or not. So that would be very, very helpful. So yeah, Kyle, if you click on that other radio button up top, I think that would be kind of a good way to see that. But this is where you can see all of your e-tickets over a historical amount of time that have been invoiced. So you could give them a yes or no. You just might not be able to tell them the specific invoice, but I'd, again, be very, very interested to see what that specific scenario looks like. So wanted to answer that one. And then Kyle, I did have another quick question on Power BI. Do we have any maintenance reporting in our pre-cooked reports with Power BI?
Not yet, but I believe they are in the pipeline, and that's something that David and AG will be talking about during the roadmap. So currently, no, they're not available, but they are or will be very shortly. Yeah, so I believe I saw that in the roadmap. AG, David, I apologize if I'm incorrect on that, but yeah, so that's one of the areas we're looking at next. We wanted to get job profitability, utilization, sales, kind of the big operational stuff first, but then maintenance obviously being very important. We wanted to get to that as well.
And then I had one more come in. Do we have any future plans for security reports? Essentially what they're looking for is comparing security profiles to each other or segregation of duties analysis. I don't know if you want to take that one, Kyle, but I have a couple thoughts on it, I guess.
Yeah, I know there's been a lot of requests for different reporting around the security profiles, and I can certainly see the need for that. So I don't believe there's anything in the current roadmap along those lines, but I'd be interested to hear the ideas, and you know, if there's a big enough want for it, we can certainly talk with our product team and see what makes sense, but not that I'm aware of.
All right, and it looks like that's all we have for now.
All right, any other questions? Nothing else came through? I'm just confirming in the one thing there. The Power BI stuff. Yeah, so just in case you're not on the roadmap session, the Power BI preventative maintenance and safety employee certs are in the coming soon roadmap. So I'll have AG give some specifics, or David, on that during that call. But the short answer is they are coming soon to Power BI. So reach out to us if you need some more information on that. Be happy to discuss. All right, well, if no more questions are in the queue, we'll wrap it up here. Thanks again, everybody, for joining today. Really appreciate it. I know everyone's busy. Hopefully you got something out of this, and any follow-up questions, please direct them towards your CSM or support or myself. We'd like to talk reports, so any ideas are always welcome as well. Any feedback. Everybody have a good rest of your day. Take care.